We're good.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to SBI's Reimagining Main Street podcast. I'm Patrick Lee, CEO of SBI, and I'm here with Laura Richards, the COO of SBI.
Hi there. So, this is a podcast where we're going to delve into all things small business, from buy local advocacy to unique tools that are going to help small businesses thrive. We're about the success of Main Street business everywhere.
Here at SBI, we believe that a healthy small business economy is the engine that makes equitable capitalism happen and promotes real-world democratic and market-driven economics possible.
So, Patrick, the timing of this podcast is pretty interesting. We've intended on doing this for a long time. We actually even started one and kind of stopped midstream when we got busy. So, this was all before COVID-19. And now that we're dealing with having such a devastating and profound thing as COVID-19 going on with our business, we're even more excited about the discussions we're having with our clients and the expertise of our Main Street folks, and being able to share that with people during the time of this incredible impact that this is having on small businesses.
And the impact is great, and everybody knows that. And I think it's been interesting to watch sort of how this has progressed, because initially folks sort of were like, okay, well, this is happening, but it's probably not going to affect us. Then you saw oh wow, this is real. Let's get real panicky about the immediacy of it, the health side of it, oh my gosh, I got to close my business and what's going to happen. And oh, now we got to apply for stimulus. And there's all this motion that starts happening because of this. And there's still some people who are in that sort of that vortex or whatever that is that's got them spinning. But a lot of folks have realized that everything has slowed to a crawl at this point. And, what do we do now? We're sitting in our houses. We're not going into the office, and everybody's talking about reinvention. But what does that mean? And what do I do with this time that I'm sitting on?
Exactly. You and I were just, cracking up a little bit because we're all dealing with these new ways of working from home and how we're going to communicate with our clients and serve our clients. Whether it's something that can be done in working from home, whether it's a service industry that you're still trying to provide essential services, from, and what does that look like? So it is a time of great adaptation. And I know you're out there talking to clients every day. So I thought one of the things we should really talk about is this kind of um, adapting our mindset to the new reality. I mean, we can all take a deep breath, once we have listened and internalized to what programs are available to us, what loans we can apply for. I think the first few weeks we were just digesting, what is this going to be? What is the help that's going to be provided? How do I understand it? So there was a lot of information initially that needed to get out to folks, and then figuring out, okay, now how do I use it? I think now we're to a place where most people have done that. There's still obviously people reaching out and doing that. But now it's more a process of, okay, this could be for a while. We could be looking at this for a while. And even when things come back online, we're probably going to be doing things a little bit differently. So what are you seeing in terms of that?
Well, I think it's a great point. It's kind of interesting too, because, when this happened, people were quick to adapt to the immediacy of this, right? I mean, who did not send out some sort of COVID-19 email blast to their clients saying what they were doing under the circumstances? I mean, everybody from your pet groomer up to, Amazon was bombarding you with emails telling you how they cared about you and what was going to happen with their business environment during this pandemic. And so that sort of happened quick. Then we saw a whole lot of adaptation to virtual meetings. I mean, Zoom, I saw a stat where a 20% owner of Zoom had jumped into the billionaires plateau, where there's some folks who had fallen out because of this, and there are some who jumped in, and there's a 20% owner of Zoom who had jumped in. Obviously, everybody's getting familiar with Google Hangout, with Zoom, with these virtual meeting forums. And there's been a whole lot of those meetings, some of which I thought were pretty interesting, of people going, okay, let's see what we can do with this. I think that's sort of, I don't want to say it's run its course. I mean, there are some folks who are making use of this in sort of a more ongoing fashion. So I think it's useful, but I also think there's been an inundation of the obvious sort of adaptation or innovation that was there, and everybody kind of jumped on. And now that's starting to slow down, and folks are actually going, okay, I know how to hold one of those meetings. I know how to talk to my clients, but what am I going to say? What am I doing? How does this translate into either business or future opportunity?
Sure. Well, I don't know if you're seeing this, but I'm certainly seeing a lot of collaboration, professional collaboration, which I think is exciting. I think we've always known on Main Street the importance of networking and really providing value to through our relationships. But I'm seeing it on an even greater scale. And I'll give you one example that I was just reading about yesterday. It was talking about food distribution and the way that our food is set up now. Um, a lot of the food goes to big places like colleges and schools for school lunches and for food service. And so now produce companies locally, like your, Keeney Produce or um, those kinds of folks who are used to supplying restaurants, are trying to figure out how to get produce directly to consumers because they don't have that market anymore. Farms selling directly to consumers. And in some cases, the milk lobby is encouraging people to dump milk because they don't have a way, because it perishes, it's so perishable. They don't have a way to transport it to people as quickly. So that's kind of one industry where I see these cooperatives and things that have been there all along are going to take hold. But I think we're seeing that on a whole other level as well. What do you think?
Um, I think the one I just read about this morning, which I thought I was waiting for who was going to do this first, but Panera Bread has started selling groceries. So you contact them and you can place your grocery order, and it's limited what they're selling, but they're getting fresh produce and fresh bread and other things that are a little bit more difficult to come by right now. And they said that they had a 75%, I believe, don't quote me, but I believe that's right, somewhere around 75% drop in sales once people could not congregate there. So their carryout was doing about 25% of what the business was doing prior to that. But they've seen this effort at providing that service has driven up revenues dramatically just in its initial offering. So there are definitely ways to be adaptive. I have one client who actually applied for the manufacturing loan and received it to turn their facilities from manufacturing trophies and engravings and that sort of thing to manufacturing masks and hospital supplies. And I think they said it took them 6 days to transform that and start selling. And if you think about that, what a smart move. And not everybody has that option, obviously. That, folks who aren't in manufacturing don't have the right facilities and all. This is a place that could do it, but you have 6 days of retrofitting, and now you're going to have months and months and months of something that's in extremely high demand. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it also frames you as a good corporate citizen as well, because it's something that is the community obviously needs.
And I also think I think that's one of the sort of the key things here, because SBI isn't just about business. SBI is about Main Street business. It's about community business. It's about local business, buy local, sustainable economics in local communities. Not about corporate capitalism. I mean, to be blunt, it's not about that. And we've seen how that has sort of worked in this pandemic. I mean, you see things like, groups like Wells Fargo who are going, we're not going to participate in any of this. It's not our fight, and we can't make any money off of it, right? And that is such a different attitude than what you see on Main Street. It's different than the collaborations you're talking about. And I sit on the board of one of the local chambers, and the worry of the folks in the chamber isn't about themselves. It's about everybody else. How's everybody going to get through this? And that is such a different mindset. The common good in a business setting. It's not all competition. It's not all gouging. It's actually how do we share in the abundance that's out there and help each other. And that's a different attitude, I think, than you see on the bigger level.
Yeah. To your point, I wanted to point out two of our kind of Main Street local folks who are doing the same thing as Panera. So up in Severna Park, you have Vita Taco restaurant up there, and they have a garage door that goes open usually to their patio, and they've turned it into an open air market, and they're doing the exact same thing, selling produce and milk and stuff, becoming a community resource. And similarly, on Maryland Avenue in downtown Annapolis, Annabeth's is now selling fresh eggs, milk, grocery items, in addition to the wine and stuff that she's always had there. And she's really done a wonderful job of just highlighting other businesses on Maryland Avenue. She's she's a big social media player, and her posts are always promoting other small businesses that are open there. So there's a Old Fox bookstore and coffee shop that's there, and they similarly have been doing delivery of packages for kind of a solitary date night, where it's a blind date, and it's a blind date with a book, and the book is wrapped in newspaper, so you don't know until you open it up, and a bottle of wine and chocolates. So just trying to figure out how to stay relevant and bring some good cheer in this time is a community service.
I think it is a community service, and I also think that it's that first stage of adapting, right? It's that first creative stage. This has happened. Now we sort of have the parameters that we're operating under, and so we've taken a step to try to make lemonade out of lemons. We've taken that step, but it's always interesting because the first step isn't necessarily the long-term best step, right? That it shows that you're thinking. It keeps you out there. It does something, but does it actively replace the amount of revenue that you've lost from your usual operations? And my guess is, in a lot of these instances, like the one you just gave, probably not. I mean, it's a great marketing thing. There's probably a little tiny bit of revenue that comes in from it, but does that constitute the business being able to stay open as a going concern? And probably not. I mean, I think some of these, Annabelle's being a good example. I think they hit upon something that's going to transform what they were delivering in a way they continued to deliver it. But those that cannot deliver at all, and now they're just trying to invent a new revenue stream in place of that becomes a whole nother thought process and innovation process that may be a little bit more difficult.
I agree. I absolutely agree. So I guess then one of the questions to ask is, some people have embraced change. They've really taken this head on, and they've shifted their mindset onto what they could be doing now. If you're a business that this doesn't come naturally for, how are you doing that? How are you creating whatever your new reality is, or what things are the people who are being successful that you're working with? What are they doing?
Well, it's interesting because I've had one of the first things that we did is we told every single client, because at the time we had no idea if we were, what this was going to do to us as a business, right? And I should quickly point out here that I'm part of two businesses. So Laura and I are here talking from the Spark Business Institute, SBI's perspective, but I also have a business called Chesapeake Think Tank where I'm more actively dealing with individual clients. I deliver services, coaching, consulting, that sort of thing to them. SBI is much more of an umbrella organization. So we're talking to you from SBI. So when I'm saying what I'm seeing, I'm talking from the CTT, the Chesapeake Think Tank side. So what I'm seeing folks who very naturally took to reinvention, and some of them are pretty far along. And when I started this process, I said, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reassure all my clients that regardless of their current situation, I'm going to be available to them. If somebody calls me up and says, look, this has totally stopped all of my revenue generation, I don't have a dime to pay you with, we're going to have to cut your services. My intention was, no, you're not going to cut my services. You need my services now more than ever. And this isn't your fault. And what good does it do me to say goodbye to you during this? This is when what I aim to provide is probably most valuable. So I told every one of my clients, whatever your situation, whatever it is, we're going to support you through this regardless. And we're hoping that you come out better on the other end. And at that time, we'll figure out what the value was and what the reciprocity is. I have not had a single client ask to leave or cut their fees. Not one. I volunteered to one that I would cut it in half because I felt they needed it, but nobody else has even taken me up on any of that. In addition, I've sat and I've talked to these clients, and there are those who just naturally jumped into, how do I provide services that are meaningful and useful out of the gate, and they're doing that. And then I have some who kind of went into hiding. And I'm not going to name somebody. I'm going to pick on one particular client who I had to chase her down, and I kept calling, and I had my assistant calling, and we finally got a hold of her, and she's like, well, there's nothing happening at my business. I've been watching what the industry I'm in does, and they're not doing anything, and there's nothing really for me to do. And so, I mean, just totally down in the dumps, no hope, like no thoughts. So we sat and we had a conversation about this, and it was really interesting because there really was a very literal interpretation of, I do these things like this, and they can't be done under this environment, so I can't do anything. I say, okay, well, what is other folks in my industry doing? I go out, I look, the industry itself isn't doing much. And so I guess there's nothing for me to do. At the end of our conversation, I had this person already running off, like excited, like, let me get off this call. I need to go start this stuff, with multiple different approaches to what she could be selling and delivering to clientele. Opportunities, not looking at this as it is a challenge, but not looking at it as a weakness or something profoundly beyond our ability to influence, but as a challenge. And I would say that one of the ideas, which I will not say here, is one that, by both of our estimation, is probably going to be monetarily more valuable than what she was selling before. If it works, it's a market that she's never thought about, and right now would be in such demand that she's going to probably profit highly from doing that. So how do you start that kind of thought process? Well, for her, it was not thinking that the industry leads you. Like, you're allowed to lead the industry. Somebody in every industry is out ahead and charting a course, and others follow. And it can be you. And other markets, just because what you know and what you've done is directed towards a certain market, doesn't mean that you can't pivot just a few degrees and open up a whole realm of things available for you to service. And that, I think it's can be hard to do, but once you do it, it's pretty profound, the impact that you can have.
That's huge. And I think what's interesting about it is some of these groups, organizations, companies, small businesses are making changes that will be sustained, or certainly will change the way that they do business, even when this COVID-19 is done.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. And let's pivot around to the industry that you're most familiar with, because it was the hardest hit industry of all out of the gate, and that's the restaurant industry. So what are you seeing and hearing there?
Well, I mean, obviously, this is just such a devastating position for most restaurants. You know, we've talked about a few people who have been able to successfully pivot. But to your point of what you said earlier about sometimes getting into different areas of, okay, let's expand our takeout operations so that we can keep our staff employed, for example. If you don't have a really good plan and aren't set up to do takeout, you're set up to do fine dining, that might not be the best call.
Yeah.
So, and I think people did make a lot of knee jerk, well, we want to stay open at all costs. And, I don't think it was necessarily good for everybody. So, I absolutely think those people need to be getting good advice. We're going to have a lot fewer restaurants when we open up after this. When things go back to normal, there are going to be fewer places. I saw, we have a favorite little local coffee shop. Very good coffee, and they had a sign in their window, last day in business is April 15th. For businesses that have been on the edge, this is just the feather that they needed to, well, I mean, obviously it's a lot more than a feather, but that,
Yeah.
it's tipping a lot of people over who were already, precariously perched. But there's going to be so much opportunity as well. So people who are putting together their business plans now, they're going to be able to get money more cheaply to start a new business. And they're going to have a lot of negotiation room with the landlords because there's going to be empty spaces. And so I think that there's certainly opportunity there. And one thing that I do think that everybody's been saying, buy local, buy local, buy local. It's kind of a Main Street mantra.
Yep.
And in our town, I know people really, in Annapolis, people really take it to heart. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that come to fruition in a lot of ways. People are buying gift cards. They're doing what they can um, to support. And I think that that's huge. I think maintaining that momentum after this is going to be really important, and reminding people about that we were there for you during COVID-19, because the restaurants that are staying open to provide a community service, we need to make sure that community members are doing their part in supporting those businesses too.
I think that, and it was interesting because here we are starting this podcast and bringing the SBI message. Well, we've been planning on doing this for quite some time. The fact that it turns out to be during the coronavirus is nothing that we saw coming or planned. We're not that prescient, but what we definitely are seeing here is that the message, our message about Main Street economy and where it belongs in all of this, is more important and more relevant right now, seeing how things are unfolding with this crisis and what that means. I mean, coming back to a couple of things you were just saying about what business, not all businesses will be there, and those that were on the edge, this probably pushed them over. I've actually had two outlier businesses that I'm working with, one of which were growing profoundly, doing really major new things, had their best January. It was the best month in the history of this business. They just doing fantastic. February sort of started to take a little bit of downturn. March was a dramatic, and for April, May, June, July, because they're planning things out, wiped it out. Depending on how these stimulus packages end up playing out or not, that business has the chance of going from hitting a height to being bankrupt. And they don't feel they have a lot of control over any of that. I also had another organization that I was working with who we were looking at, probably there was a good chance, very good chance. We were working to make it not happen, but there's a very good chance this organization was going to be gone by the end of June, that they would not be able to reinvent themselves and survive. And there was a lot of work to either close it down nicely or find some way to rescue it. This has actually saved it. This allowing of contracts to be voided and things to be shut down, and that sort of pause in everything, and the applying for these loans and grants and all. This organization is probably going to have this circumstance be its savior, quite honestly. So those two outliers, that shows you how different the approach is and how you can't assume anything, right? So the whole concept of this is the time for businesses, Main Street businesses, to rally around each other and be helpful and figure out how to support each other and all. I think that's incredibly important, and it's a message that needs to go beyond just a crisis like this. You know, Main Street capitalism to me means a local sustainable capitalism, right? This is where the market really does determine if you have good service, if you have good food, if you have good, good location, if you do things a certain way, people want to be there. This isn't the huge deep pockets funded by government to come in and take over just by sheer force of size, right? This is where the market really does work. If you're good, you'll benefit, and that's what it should be.
I agree with you 100%. It also makes me wonder, for those companies who are on the edge, if you're listening, um, find out what your resources are and what your options are, because some of these loans, have forgiveness clauses in them, and they can end up being a saving grace, and it may not be time to shutter your business. So I hope everybody's getting all the facts before they make those kinds of calls about their next steps.
Absolutely. And you need to go and you need to talk to more than one source. What we're finding right now is those folks who are even supposed to know how these programs work and what it is, they don't know. And as this stuff is rolling out, we had one instance where a particular bank who was doing the PPP loan put out a form that a whole bunch of their clients who were early in used, and the form was wrong.
Oh no.
And so they had to go back and tell everybody, if you did this, you have to completely redo it. And there are probably some folks who even missed that notice. Like, you hope that bank took the time to go and look everybody up and contact them. But the truth is, the experts don't actually know how half of this is working. And the intent never actually goes 100% the way it's intended. And you go back to the Great Recession, one of the stats that was put out there was that Bank of America had taken a whole bunch of the stimulus money that was intended to be filtered down to businesses and clients and all, and about 4%, the number that I read, 4% of the money that Bank of America took was actually used for that purpose. The remaining 96% was used by Bank of America to buy up assets that were challenged because of the Great Recession and increase their own wealth and all. So the intention is not always what happens. And so you need to take your time to be an advocate for yourself, and to make sure that you're talking to people and checking it and checking it and checking it, because there is a lot of misinformation floating around right now.
Heard. I think that's excellent advice. So we talked a little bit about reciprocal business support, or how businesses are working together. if you were going to give client advice about how to identify people who might be good um, players in that space for them, how does somebody figure that out? I mean, some of it's intuitive. If you're a restaurant, you could call your produce delivery people partners and your whatever, and you could kind of come up with an idea to how to meet consumer demand. But if it's a different kind of business, is there a process that you take people through to figure it out?
Um, I, I think a process is a bit aggressive. I don't I don't think there's necessarily a
We don't have a 9-point process for that yet.
I don't. But I do think there are some key elements of what you look at. If you're a manufacturer versus a service business, that changes approach. If you're one of the in betweens, if you're a contractor or something like that, where you're building something, but it's from a service perspective, that also changes how you look at it. I also think if you're business to business versus business to consumer, that also changes. So, I think identifying where you sit, and then who are the players around you that service those same markets. Maybe they're doing something different to the market, but it's the exact same people. And do they provide something you don't, or do you provide something they don't? Is there a team up there that makes some sense? It's one of the more innovative things that there was a couple I'll tell you, but one of the interesting ones was I have a tax preparer, and the tax preparer teamed up with a local delivery company. So it's not UPS or anything. It's like somebody who just takes, you call them up and you say, I've got something that needs to be somewhere in an hour, and they come pick it up and they drive it there, right? So this tax preparer teamed up with them and set up this thing where you still need your taxes done, thankfully now by July 15th, but you don't want to come in contact with anybody. We don't come in contact with you either. So we've come up with a process whereby we pick up all your stuff at your doorstep. You never see anybody. Nobody touches anything. It goes into a bin that gets all wiped down, and it's delivered to our offices. We process it. Any questions we have can be done by Zoom or email. And then the person picks them up and drives them right back to you. And you wonder if that's going to become a standard. You wonder if, like, why do we have to go into our tax preparer's office at all anymore? Why doesn't that become the new norm? So the thought there is a good one, right? Like, we need to do this. This circumstances demand this, and here's a business operating locally who also is in need of business, right? A lot of things have shut down. They're not doing the same sort of delivery. So I think that's a great example. I think the other example, I've seen a lot of business to businesses come up with ways in which it's almost a barter. It's not really a barter. It's more of a forgiveness of services for future value.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've seen a lot of marketing firms saying to clients, now's the time to do this. We know you're in this situation, so we're going to provide you all these. We're going to bet on you. We're going to provide marketing services at either no cost or reduced cost, as long as you sign us on as your provider when this is over with. And we're betting on you survive, and that benefits us both, right? And so I think there's a lot of that that sort of team up. I also think there's switches in thought process. I read an article about how this is working in France, and the bicycle food delivery people were considered the lowest of the low in terms of workforce in France, and now they are the highest of the high. Like, they can't find enough of them. They're getting paid astronomical amounts of money, and they're busier than all get out, because that's what everything is food being delivered to the doors. And I thought that was just so fascinating, how a low-paying, grunt position all of a sudden is the most in-demand position in an economy. That's fascinating.
It really is. And that's actually our last topic that I have on my little list of topics for our first podcast. It was envisioning new enterprises and how that they take shape after COVID-19 or during it and how it's impacted. And just like what you're talking about, I've seen local grocery delivery folks. So, Instacart, it takes 3 weeks now to get your grocery order. If you're trying to do Wegmans online, if you're trying to do Whole Foods online, they are so booked up. There's only so many slots. There was only so many trained people. They can't keep up with demands. And very enterprising young people are coming up with services either specifically targeted. They were once specifically targeted to the elder community who couldn't get out, and they've quickly pivoted to now providing grocery delivery for everyone. I wish I could remember the young woman who's doing it here in Annapolis locally, but she has a cute little branded page, and she's meeting the needs of people to get Easter deliveries, because right now, if you try any of the grocery delivery companies, you can't make it by the holiday. So I think there are new enterprises and that are going to come out of this, and new ways, obviously, of doing business, like we've already talked about. Do you have anything you'd add on that?
Well, there's some fascinating things happening. That the first thing is, let's be straightforward. Main Street retail and Main Street's ability to compete with the big boys has always been a problem. How can you get supplies at prices that you can compete with Walmart? If Amazon is shipping everything under the sun in 12 hours to people's doors at cheap prices, how do you get them to come into your store and care? Like the idea of how Main Street competes with the marketplace the way it's designed right now, it has been problematic, and it's gotten more problematic with this. I mean, if you look at the company that has benefited the most from this, it's Amazon. And it's interesting to see that, but it also opens up concepts now. Like, now that we've gone virtual, now that we've gone hyper efficient, because my business right now is hyper efficient. All of my meetings with clients are being done by Zoom. I've cut out the driving to their office, or they're driving to my office. The Zoom meetings tend to last about a half hour less than a typical other meeting, and I can move from one to the other with no shift in time. So there's a hyper efficiency that's all of a sudden occurred here. Now, I don't know that that's something desired by the client, that it's always that way, but it opens up that concept of, okay, we've just learned something, we've seen something, this matters, how do we adapt it? And I think that is going to be where a lot of the adaptations that stick after this, how and what that looks like is going to be in those realms. What social niceties disappear because of this and become places for efficiency? What things are deemed absolutely essential now? That whole idea that no, I only do business face to face. Well, you can't do business face to face. So what does that mean? That doesn't answer the direct question of what is the adaptations in the marketplace that are going to stick. But I think we're early to that. But I think we're starting to see trending here. I mean, the commercial real estate market is pretty much going to crash here. I don't know if it rebounds if it doesn't come up with new methods, because folks are going to recognize that, wait a minute, we don't need that much space, and this really does work, and you can have a remote workforce, and look, they're actually doing the same numbers they were doing before. And so let's just take commercial real estate for a second. What would I be looking at? I'd be looking at shared workspaces. I'd be looking at, instead of redundancies where everybody has a stairwell and a foyer and a front desk and so on, do we start doing more shared workspaces, and businesses come in and they use the spaces they need, and it's staffed with a certain minimum level of greeting, phone answering, making copies type of folks who are there for everybody. So we're not redundant in our spending for those services and personnel. And do we see a pivot by commercial space to become more user friendly and less overhead based?
And I even have another to add to that. You know, we talked a lot about the development of third spaces. We have as a society between our Starbuckses and, you know, banks that were acting as a third space, you know, a place between office and home. I would almost take it one step further and say, if everyone's learned how to adapt by working from home, do you need a third space? You know, will people still go someplace to socially work if they've figured it out and they now have mastered working from their own home?
But you know what's interesting too is you could bet exactly the other way, because this is the part where it's hard to be predictive, and those who get it right, well, good for them. But like, it's only been 8 days that I've been in lockdown, and there's a restaurant that I like to go to for my margaritas, and I'm probably going to drink 50 of them in the first 3 days after I get out of here. And it's, that pent up realization by folks that, wait a minute, things that we do intrinsically and it's just habit, we don't even notice it, we're missing it. I mean, the appreciation of a good meal out, of good service, of a social leisure activity that is provided nicely and is affordable and is there. And I mean, do we all of a sudden exit this all with such a hyper appreciation of that those businesses actually thrive? Like, everybody's like, I'm going out to eat every other day from now on. I mean, I don't know, but you can envision it happening.
Absolutely. You definitely can. Well, I think this is a perfect opportunity for us to thank everybody for tuning into the Small Business Revolution podcast. I'm Laura Richards.
I'm Patrick Lee.
Be sure to join us next week.
Thank you, Laura.